Dust stung my eyes as I pushed through the creaking doors of the Last Chance Saloon. The air hit me like a fist, thick with whiskey, sweat, and the faint sour tang of blood from fights long forgotten. My boots thudded on the worn wooden floor, each step a dull echo, like a hammer striking a coffin nail. I wasn't looking for trouble, never was. But trouble had a nose for me, like a coyote sniffing out a wounded deer in the sagebrush. The saloon was half full, the usual mix of drifters, ranch hands, and old-timers hunched over their drinks. Lanterns flickered on the walls, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the scarred tables. I tipped my hat to Pete, the barkeep, his beard gray as ash, his eyes sharp from years of watching men tear each other apart. He nodded back, slow, cautious. Pete always knew when a storm was brewing, and tonight I could feel it in my bones. I slid onto a stool at the bar, the leather of my holster creaking as I settled. My Colt 45 sat heavy on my hip, a cold, familiar weight. 3 years of running had made me twitchy, always checking the door, always listening for hoofbeats in the distance. My name's Colt Brennan now, but it wasn't always. Once I was Cole Hartwell, a name buried under blood and regret, a name tied to the Blackthorn Gang, a pack of killers I'd ridden with and a life I'd sworn to leave behind. That past clung to me, sharp as a spur, no matter how far I ran. "Whiskey," I said, voice low, rough from days on the trail. Pete poured, the amber liquid catching the lantern light like a promise of trouble. I tossed a coin on the counter. It spun, glinted, then fell still with a soft clink. That's when I heard it. Boots, heavy and deliberate, stomping across the floor behind me. Not the lazy shuffle of a drunk. Purposeful, angry. "Colt Brennan," a voice growled, coarse as gravel dragged under a wagon wheel. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Amos Caldwell, the man who owned half this territory, land, water, and the souls of anyone desperate enough to beg for his scraps. His shadow fell over me, broad and heavy, like a thundercloud ready to burst. I took a slow sip of whiskey, letting it burn down my throat, sharp and bitter. "Amos," I said, eyes still on my glass, "what's your beef?" "You owe me $50, he spat, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "For that load of cattle feed you took last month. Pay up, or you'll regret ever setting foot in my town." "Hold up, partner. If you love a good cowboy showdown, smash that subscribe button and comment yeehaw below. Don't miss the final shootout. It'll leave you speechless." The saloon went dead quiet. Glasses stopped clinking. Whispers faded. Every eye in the room locked on us, waiting for the spark to catch fire. I set my glass down, deliberate, the soft thud louder than it should have been. $50. A fortune out here, enough to buy a good horse or a month's worth of grub. But I'd paid him. A month ago in cold, hard cash right into his weathered palm. I'd seen his signature on the receipt, his scrawl as shaky as his temper. "I paid you, Amos," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my pulse was starting to race. "Cash, a month back, right in your office." His lip curled, showing yellowed teeth stained by years of tobacco and whiskey. "Liar." He stepped closer, his breath hot with liquor, his fancy silk vest brushing against the bar. "You think you can cheat Amos Caldwell? In my own damn town, in front of my own damn people?" That word, liar, hit me like a slap across the face. My chest tightened, the old anger I'd buried clawing its way up. 3 years ago, I'd have drawn my gun and settled this the hard way, no questions asked. Back then, I was Cole Hartwell, a man who didn't flinch at blood. But I wasn't him anymore, or so I kept telling myself. My hand twitched toward my vest pocket, where the torn pieces of that receipt sat, crumpled but real. Proof I wasn't lying. Proof Amos was wrong. I'd tried to show him, a week back, when he first started this nonsense. I'd pulled out the receipt, held it up in his own office. He'd laughed, a cold, cruel sound, and ripped it to shreds, tossing the pieces in my face. "Forged," he'd called it, his voice dripping with scorn. "You think you can fool me with a scrap of paper?" In a town where Amos owned the bank, the sheriff, and half the businesses, a torn receipt was as good as dust. My word against his was like spitting into a dust storm. "Show me that receipt," he'd sneered then, and he was sneering now, his eyes daring me to try. "Or I'll have you strung up for a thief." I stood, slow, keeping my hands clear of my gun. The saloon was a powder keg, and one wrong move could light the fuse. "I ain't a liar, Amos," I said, meeting his gaze. "And I ain't a thief. You know it." His eyes narrowed to slits. and before I could blink, he grabbed my shirt, yanking me close. His knuckles dug into my chest, his face inches from mine. "You calling me out, boy?" he hissed, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "In front of everyone?" That was it. Something snapped inside me, like a dry branch under a boot. The years of running, hiding, swallowing my pride, it all boiled over in a single red-hot second. My fist moved before my brain could catch up, cracking against his jaw with a sound like a whip. Amos staggered back, his fancy hat flying off, his arms flailing. He hit a table, hard, and it splintered under his weight, sending him crashing to the floor. Blood trickled from his nose, staining his silk vest, pooling in the sawdust. His silver hair fell across his face, making him look older, frailer, but no less dangerous. The saloon gasped as one, the air thick with shock. I stood over him, my knuckles stinging, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. What the hell had I done? Amos Caldwell wasn't some barroom brawler. He was the king of this territory, a man who could buy a hanging with a nod. His word was law out here, and I just laid him out like a common drunk. "You're a dead man, Brennan," Amos wheezed, wiping blood with a trembling hand. He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on a chair, his eyes blazing with a fury that could burn a man to ash. "My boy Gideon's riding back from Redstone today. When he hears you did this, he'll skin you alive and leave you for the buzzards." Gideon Caldwell. The name hit me like a bullet to the gut. I'd never met him, but I'd heard the stories whispered in every saloon from here to Ironwood Pass. A man who'd gunned down 4 cattle rustlers in a single night, their bodies left swinging from an oak tree as a warning. A man who rode with an army of loyal killers, each one ready to die for him. A man who didn't know the word mercy. And now he was coming. For me. My mouth went dry, but I kept my face steady. The saloon was watching, waiting, judging. Pete froze mid-pour, his eyes wide as saucers. Jasper, the old-timer in the corner, shook his head like he was already carving my name on a tombstone. The saloon girls backed away, their whispers sharp as knives, their eyes darting between me and Amos. I'd just signed my own death warrant, and every soul in that room knew it. "Amos," I said, my voice low, trying to keep the tremor out. "I paid you. You tore up the proof. You called me a liar. I ain't sorry for hitting you, but I don't want a war." "War?" He laughed, a wet, ugly sound that made my skin crawl. "This ain't gonna be a war, boy. It's gonna be a slaughter." He spat blood onto the sawdust, his grin more terrifying than any scream. "Gideon's got 40 men with him. 40, and they'll be here in 20 minutes. My stomach dropped like a stone in a well. 40 men, an army, all for one punch over $50. I glanced at the door, my mind racing, calculating. My horse, Shadow, was tied out back, black as midnight and fast as a prairie wind. He could get me out of town, maybe outrun a few riders. But 40? In these hills where Gideon knew every trail, every canyon, every damn rock, that was a different kind of trouble, the kind that didn't stop until it tasted blood. My fingers brushed the torn receipt in my vest pocket, its edges sharp against my skin. I'd kept it, even after Amos ripped it apart. It was my only hope, those scraps of paper with his signature, the bank's stamp, proof I wasn't lying. If I could get to Gideon, show him the truth, maybe, just maybe, I could walk out of this alive. But Amos owned this town. His word was gospel, and mine was nothing. Even with the receipt, would Gideon listen? Or would he just put a bullet in my head and call it justice? The saloon doors swung open with a bang, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. A kid, no older than 12, burst in, his face red from running, his chest heaving. "Mr. Caldwell," he gasped, voice cracking with urgency. "Gideon's coming. I saw him. Dust cloud a mile wide, and they're moving fast." My heart stopped. I could almost hear it now, the faint growing thunder of hoofbeats rolling in from the horizon like a storm. 40 riders, 40 guns, all coming for me. I backed toward the bar, my hand brushing my Colt 45. It was an old friend, one that had saved me more times than I cared to count. Back in Ironwood Pass, it had dropped 3 men in 5 seconds, their blood soaking the dust before they could draw. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. That was the life I'd left behind, or tried to. But the past doesn't let go. It's a bloodhound with your scent, and it always catches up. "You're gonna wish you never stepped foot in this town," Amos said, his voice dripping venom. He'd pulled himself up, leaning on the bar now, his bloody nose still leaking, staining his silk vest. "Gideon don't take kindly to folks who lay hands on his paw." I didn't answer. My mind was spinning, mapping out every option, every escape. The back door was 10 steps away, through the storeroom, past the crates of whiskey and sacks of flour. Shadow could get me out of town, but Gideon's men would hunt me down like a dog. These hills were their territory, every ridge, every gulch. They knew them better than I ever would. Running might buy me an hour, maybe 2. But it wouldn't save me. The saloon was dead silent now, save for the faint creak of the floorboards under my boots. I could feel the weight of their stares. Pete, Jasper, the saloon girls, the drifters, judging me, waiting to see how long I'd last. Jasper caught my eye again, his face grim. "You're done for, son," he muttered, barely loud enough to hear. "Ain't no way out of this." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, to shout that I could handle this. But deep down, I knew he wasn't. 3 years I'd been running from my past, changing my name, growing a beard, keeping my head low. I'd built a new life as Colt Brennan, a drifter who kept to himself, who paid his debts and stayed out of trouble. But one punch, one moment of lost control, and it was all unraveling. Cole Hartwell was clawing his way back, dragging me down with him. "Amos," I tried again, my voice rougher now, the whiskey's burn still lingering in my throat. "Let's settle this. You know I paid. You know it." He laughed, a cold, bitter sound that echoed off the walls. "Settle? Only thing getting settled is your corpse in a shallow grave." He wiped his nose with a silk handkerchief, his hands shaking with rage, his eyes gleaming with vindictive satisfaction. "You think you can waltz into my town, steal from me, and walk away? You're dumber than you look, boy." The kid by the door was still panting, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement, the kind only a kid gets when he's about to see something terrible. "Mr. Brennan," he whispered, his voice trembling, "they say Gideon's got long-range rifles, sharpshooters. They can hit a man from a quarter mile." I nodded, grim, my jaw tight. He wasn't telling me anything I didn't already know. Gideon Caldwell wasn't just a man, he was a legend. A killer who'd strung up outlaws and left their bodies swinging as a warning to anyone who crossed him. And now, I'd given him a reason to come for me. I glanced out the window, the glass smudged with years of dust and smoke. The dust cloud was closer now, a swirling mass of death rolling toward us. My fingers brushed the torn receipt again, its edges sharp against my calloused skin. It was all I had, a few scraps of paper against 40 guns, but it was something. If I could get to Gideon, show him the truth, maybe I could walk out of this alive. Maybe. The saloon doors rattled in their frames, the sound sharp in the tense air. Maybe it was the wind, maybe it was the hoofbeats closing in. My pulse hammered in my ears, louder than the crowd's whispers, louder than Amos's labored breathing. I wasn't a coward, no matter what they called me, but standing here, with Amos's blood on my knuckles and Gideon's army bearing down, I felt fear clawing at my gut, cold and relentless. 3 years ago, I'd walked away from Ironwood Pass, leaving behind a trail of bodies and a name I swore I'd never speak again. Cole Hartwell was dead, buried in the dust of that cursed canyon. Colt Brennan was supposed to be a new man, a man who paid his debts and kept his head down. But one punch had brought it all crashing down, one moment of anger, and I was staring down the barrel of my past. "Amos," I said, one last time, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, "you're making a mistake." He just grinned, blood staining his teeth, his eyes glinting with malice. "No, boy," he said, his voice low and deadly. "You are." The kid's words hit me like a shotgun blast. "Gideon's coming!" he'd gasped, his voice cracking, his eyes wide with the kind of excitement only a boy gets when he smells blood in the air. I stood frozen in the Last Chance saloon, Amos Caldwell's blood still fresh on my knuckles, the taste of whiskey sour in my mouth. The air was thick, heavy with the stink of sweat and fear. My fear. 40 riders, 40 guns, all coming for me. For one damn punch over $50. I could hear it now, the faint rumble of hoofbeats like thunder rolling in from the hills. It wasn't loud yet, but it was growing, steady and relentless, shaking the glasses on the bar. I glanced out the smudged window, and there it was, a dust cloud on the horizon, swirling like a storm, ready to swallow this town whole. Gideon Caldwell and his army were close, too close. My heart pounded, a wild thing trapped in my chest. I backed away from the bar, my boots scraping the worn wooden floor. Every eye in the saloon was on me. Pete the barkeep, Jasper the old-timer, the saloon girls whispering in the corner. They weren't just watching, they were waiting to see how a man like me, Colt Brennan, would face his end. Or maybe they were betting I'd run like the coward they thought I was. I ain't a coward, never was. But standing there with Amos sprawled against the bar, his bloody nose staining his fancy silk vest, I felt fear clawing at my gut. Amos grinned through his split lip, his eyes gleaming with vindictive glee. "You're done, Brennan," he rasped, wiping blood with a trembling hand. "Gideon's gonna tear you apart. 40 men, boy. Ain't no running from that." I didn't answer. My mind was racing, spinning like a dust devil. The back door was 10 steps away, through the storeroom, past crates of whiskey and sacks of flour. My horse, Shadow, was tied out there, black as midnight, and faster than any nag in these parts. He could get me out of town, maybe outrun a few riders, but 40? In these hills, where Gideon knew every trail, every canyon, every damn rock, that was a fool's hope. My hand brushed the Colt 45 on my hip, its weight familiar, deadly. 3 years ago, in Ironwood Pass, this gun had saved me. 3 men dead in 5 seconds, their blood soaking the dust before they could draw. Not because I wanted to kill, because I had to. Back then, I was Cole Hartwell, riding with the Blackthorn Gang, a pack of killers who'd burn a town for a sack of gold. I'd left that life behind, buried it deep, but it was clawing its way back, like a corpse rising from a shallow grave. "Running won't save you," Amos said, his voice low, taunting. He leaned on the bar, his silver hair falling across his face, making him look older, frailer, but no less dangerous. "Gideon's got sharpshooters, long-range rifles. They'll pick you off before you hit the canyon." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as the desert outside. The kid was still by the door, panting, his eyes darting between me and Amos. "Mr. Brennan," he whispered, voice trembling. "They say Gideon's men can hit a man from a quarter mile. Ain't no hiding from 'em." I nodded, grim, my jaw tight. He wasn't telling me anything I didn't know. Gideon Caldwell was a legend, whispered about in every saloon from here to Redstone. A man who'd gunned down 4 rustlers in a single night, their bodies left swinging from an oak tree as a warning. A man who rode with an army of loyal killers, each one ready to die for him. And now, I'd given him a reason to come for me. One punch, one moment of lost control, and it was all unraveling. I glanced at the window again. The dust cloud was closer now, a churning wall of grit and death. I could make out shapes in the haze, riders moving in formation like soldiers, not cowboys. My pulse hammered in my ears, louder than the whispers of the saloon crowd, louder than Amos's labored breathing. I wasn't a coward, but I'd be a liar if I said I wasn't scared. 40 guns, 1 man. The math didn't add up. My fingers brushed the torn receipt in my vest pocket, its edges sharp against my calloused skin. I'd kept it, even after Amos ripped it apart, laughing in my face. His signature was still there, faint but real, along with the bank stamp. Proof I'd paid the $50 for that cattle feed. Proof I wasn't a liar, a thief, or whatever else he'd called me. But in a town where Amos owned the bank, the sheriff, and half the souls, a scrap of paper meant nothing. Would Gideon even look at it? Or would he just put a bullet in my head and call it justice? "You're thinking about running, ain't you?" Amos said, his grin widening, blood staining his teeth. "Go ahead. Try. Gideon's men'll hunt you down like a dog. Ain't no canyon deep enough to hide you." I didn't answer. I was thinking, all right, but not about running, not yet. My mind flashed back to Ironwood Pass 3 years ago. The Blackthorn Gang, the job that went wrong, the blood, the screams. I'd been one of them, riding under a different name, Cole Hartwell, a name I'd buried when I walked away, leaving behind a trail of bodies and a past that still woke me up sweating in the dead of night. I'd seen what men like Gideon could do. I'd done it, and I knew what it cost. The saloon doors rattled, the sound sharp in the tense air. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was the hoofbeats, closer now, shaking the ground like an earthquake. I took a step toward the back door, my boots heavy, my heart heavier. Running was a bad bet, but staying felt like suicide. 40 riders, 40 guns, and me with a torn receipt and a gun I didn't want to draw. "Look at him," Amos called out, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Colt Brennan, the big tough drifter, running like the yellow dog he is." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others looking away. They didn't know me, didn't know I'd paid that debt, didn't know the man I'd been or the man I was trying to be. I stopped, my hand on the storeroom door. "I ain't running, Amos," I said, turning to face him. My voice was steadier than I felt. "Not yet, but I ain't looking for a fight neither." He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Fight, boy. This ain't gonna be a fight. It's gonna be an execution." The kid by the door shifted, his eyes wide, his hands trembling. "Mr. Brennan," he said, almost too quiet to hear. "They're almost here. I can see 'em now. Riders, lots of 'em." I followed his gaze to the window. The dust cloud was swallowing the horizon, and I could make out the shapes clearer now. Men on horseback, moving fast, their long coats flapping like vultures' wings. Gideon was out there, leading them. A man born in the saddle, a man who'd never lost a fight. My hand tightened on my gun, muscle memory from years of violence, but I didn't draw. Not yet. The saloon was a cage now, the walls closing in. Pete was still frozen behind the bar, his rag dangling from his hand. Jasper, the old-timer, was muttering something under his breath, probably a prayer for my soul. The saloon girls had backed into a corner, their faces pale, their whispers sharp as knives. They weren't betting on me. Nobody was. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of whiskey and fear. My fear. I could run. I could ride shadow into the hills, take my chances in the canyons. But Gideon's men would find me. They always did. I'd seen what happened to men who crossed the Caldwells. I'd heard the stories. Bodies left in the dust, picked clean by buzzards. I'd been that kind of man once, riding with the Blackthorn gang, leaving my own trail of death. I didn't want to be him again. But the past doesn't care what you want. It's a bloodhound, and it had my scent. Ironwood Pass flashed in my mind again. The job that went wrong, the gold shipment, the ambush, the screams of men I'd called brothers, cut down by my own hand when I realized what they'd done. I'd walked away, but not clean. Never clean. And now, Gideon Caldwell was coming to make me pay for a debt I didn't owe. My fingers brushed the receipt again. It was all I had, a few scraps of paper against an army. I could feel Amos's eyes on me, his grin like a wolf baring its teeth. "You're wasting time, Brennan," he said, spitting blood onto the floor. "Gideon's gonna be here any minute, and when he sees what you did to me, he'll make sure you suffer." I didn't look at him. My eyes were on the window, on the dust cloud growing larger, darker, like a storm about to break. The hoofbeats were louder now, rattling the windows, shaking the glasses on the bar. I could feel the weight of the saloon, the weight of the town, the weight of my past, all pressing down on me. I wasn't a coward. I'd faced death before. But this was different. This was 40 men, 40 guns, and a man who'd never lost. "Amos," I said, my voice low, "you're wrong about me. I paid you. I ain't a liar, and I ain't a thief." He laughed again, colder this time. "Tell that to Gideon. Tell that to his rifles." The kid by the door was shaking now, his eyes glued to the window. "They're here," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "I can see him. Gideon's in front. He's got that long coat. And his men. They're spreading out." My blood ran cold. I could see them now too. Riders fanning out, surrounding the saloon, cutting off every escape. They weren't just coming to talk, they were coming to kill. I took another step toward the back door, my hand still on my gun. Running was a bad bet, but staying was worse. I thought of Shadow, waiting out back, his black coat gleaming in the fading light. He was my only chance, but then I stopped. Something inside me shifted. I'd been running for 3 years, running from Ironwood Pass, from Cole Hartwell, from the man I'd been. I was tired of it, tired of hiding, tired of looking over my shoulder. If Gideon was coming, if this was my end, I'd face it like a man, not a coward, not a liar, not a thief. I turned back to Amos, my jaw tight, my eyes hard. "I ain't running, Amos," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "But I ain't dying easy either." He just grinned, blood dripping from his nose. "We'll see about that, boy." The hoofbeats were deafening now, a roar that shook the saloon to its bones. The dust cloud was right outside, swallowing the street, the town, the world. Gideon Caldwell was here, and I was out of time. The hoofbeats were a roar now, shaking the Last Chance saloon to its bones. Dust poured through the open windows, choking the air, stinging my eyes. I stood in the middle of the room, my boots planted on the creaking floor, my heart hammering like a blacksmith's anvil. Gideon Caldwell and his 40 riders were here. I could feel their presence, heavy as a storm cloud, pressing down on me. My hand hovered near my Colt 45, not drawing, not yet, but ready. The saloon was a cage, and I was the trapped animal. Amos Caldwell leaned against the bar, his bloody nose still dripping, his grin sharp as a blade. "You're done, Brennan," he rasped, wiping his face with a silk handkerchief. "My boy Gideon's gonna make you wish you were never born." I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the saloon doors, waiting for them to burst open. The crowd pressed against the walls. Pete the barkeep, Jasper the old-timer, the saloon girls, all silent, their faces pale, their breaths held. They knew what was coming, a reckoning, and I was the one to face it. The doors exploded inward with a crash, splinters flying like shrapnel. Gideon Caldwell stepped through, tall as a mountain, his long coat flapping like a raven's wings. His steel-gray eyes, so like his father's, swept the room, cold and unyielding. Behind him, his men fanned out, 40 shadows armed to the teeth, rifles gleaming in the lantern light. They moved with precision, blocking every exit, their faces hard as stone. This wasn't a posse. This was an execution squad. Gideon's gaze found his father first, taking in the blood on Amos's vest, the swollen nose, the disheveled hair. Something dark flickered across his face, anger maybe, or something deeper. Then his eyes landed on me, and I felt it, a chill like a winter wind cutting through my bones. "Pa," he said, his voice low, deadly. "Who did this to you?" Amos pointed a trembling finger at me, his voice thick with venom. "That yellow dog right there, Colt Brennan, beat me down over $50 he owes, disrespected our name in front of everyone." The crowd murmured, a low hum of fear and anticipation. I stood my ground, my hand still near my gun, my pulse racing. 40 rifles were trained on me, hammers cocked, ready to end me. But I wasn't going down like this, not for a lie. Not for Amos's greed. "I paid that debt," I said, my voice steady, carrying to every corner of the saloon. "A month ago. Cash. You signed the receipt, Amos. Then you tore it up, called me a liar." Gideon's eyes narrowed, studying me like a wolf sizing up prey. "You calling my pa a liar?" His hand rested on his own gun, a pearl-handled revolver that looked like it had ended more lives than I cared to count. "I'm calling him a man who made a mistake," I said, careful, measured. "A mistake that got out of hand when he grabbed me first." Amos's face flushed red, his voice rising. "He's lying, Gideon. He's a thief, a cheat. Don't let him." "Shut up, Pa," Gideon snapped, his voice cutting like a whip. The room went still, even Amos freezing mid-sentence. Gideon's attention was on me now, his eyes boring into mine, searching for something, truth maybe, or weakness. "You got proof of this payment?" My heart skipped. This was my chance, my only chance. I nodded, slow, keeping my hands visible. "In my vest pocket, torn up receipt, your pa's signature, the bank's stamp, it's real." Gideon's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Show me." I moved slow, deliberate, aware of 40 rifles tracking my every twitch. My fingers brushed the torn scraps in my pocket, the paper crinkling like dry leaves. I could feel the weight of the room, the weight of my past, pressing down. 3 years ago, in Ironwood Pass, I'd learned what it meant to be hunted. The Blackthorn gang, the gold shipment, the ambush that went wrong. I'd walked away, but not clean, never clean. And now that past was catching up, right here, in this dusty saloon. Amos lunged forward, his voice a desperate snarl. "He's going for his gun!" The room erupted in chaos, rifles swinging, hammers clicking, the crowd gasping. But Gideon raised a hand, sharp, commanding. "Nobody moves," he barked, his voice like thunder. "Nobody breathes, not till I see what's in his hand." I froze, my hand half out of my pocket, the torn receipt clutched between my fingers. The silence was deafening, the rustle of paper loud as a gunshot. 40 rifles stayed locked on me, but Gideon's hand kept them from firing. He stepped closer, his boots echoing on the wooden floor, his eyes never leaving mine. "Set it on the bar," he said, slow. I did as he said, placing the scraps on the stained wood, my hands steady despite the adrenaline burning through me. Gideon approached, his fingers moving the pieces like a puzzle, reassembling the receipt with a practiced calm. Amos watched, sweat beading on his forehead, his eyes darting between his son and me. "Son, don't let him fool you with some forged—" "I said shut up, Pa," Gideon growled, his voice a warning that made Amos step back. He studied the receipt, his face unreadable, his fingers tracing the bank's stamp, his father's scrawl. The saloon held its breath, waiting for his verdict. Then the doors swung open again, and a new voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Well, well, Colt Brennan," it drawled, heavy with authority. "Or should I say Cole Hartwell?" My blood turned to ice. I knew that voice. Marshal Elias Vaughn, a legend in these parts, a man who'd tracked outlaws across 3 territories and never came home empty-handed. He stepped into the saloon, his badge glinting like a warning, his cold blue eyes fixed on me. Behind him, Sheriff Daniels shuffled in, nervous, his hands twitching like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Marshal Vaughn," Gideon said, his voice cautious, his eyes still on the receipt. "What's your business here?" Vaughn's smile was thin, dangerous. "Federal warrant for Brennan's arrest, murder, robbery, and the killing of federal agents in Ironwood Pass." The room gasped, the air sucked out like a bellows. Even Gideon's men shifted, their rifles wavering. Killing federal agents was a hanging offense. No trial needed. I felt the weight of their stares, the crowd turning against me, their whispers sharp as knives. Cole Hartwell, my old name, dragged out of the grave, laid bare for all to see. "That's a lie," I said, my voice low but firm. "I didn't kill those agents." Vaughn laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Sure you didn't. Tell that to the widows of the 3 men you gunned down." He took a step closer, his hand on his gun. "You're coming with me, Hartwell, dead or alive." My mind raced, memories of Ironwood Pass flooding back, the gold shipment, the ambush, the Blackthorn gang turning on me when I tried to stop them. I'd killed them, yeah, but only after they murdered those agents. And Vaughn, he was the one pulling the strings, the one who'd set it all up for a cut of the gold. I'd found proof, a letter from one of the agents, hidden in my saddlebag all these years. Proof that could bury him. "You want the truth, Vaughn?" I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "Tell him about Ironwood Pass. Tell him how you planned the ambush, how you betrayed your own men for gold." The saloon went silent. Every eye on Vaughn now. His smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. I'd hit a nerve. "You're talking nonsense," he snarled, his hand tightening on his gun. "Am I?" I took a step forward, ignoring the rifles, my voice rising. "Tell him about the letter, the one Agent Carter wrote before you shot him in the back, the one that names you as the traitor." Vaughn's face went pale, his eyes darting to Gideon, then back to me. "Nobody's gonna believe a wanted killer over a federal marshal." "Maybe not," I said, my hand moving to my saddlebag, where the letter was tucked away. "But they'll believe this." Gideon's eyes flicked to me, sharp, curious. "What letter?" I moved slow, pulling the folded paper from my bag, every eye on me, every rifle ready. "Carter's last words," I said. "He knew you were dirty, Vaughn, wrote it all down. Dates, places, your cut of the gold." Vaughn's gun cleared leather in a flash, aimed at my chest. "Nobody's reading that letter," he growled. "You die here, Hartwell, and it burns with you." But Gideon stepped between us, his own gun drawn, his voice calm but deadly. "Lower your weapon, Marshal. You're outnumbered." The saloon was a powder keg ready to explode. My hand hovered near my Colt, my eyes locked on Vaughn's. The truth was in my hand, but it wouldn't mean a damn thing if I was dead. 40 rifles, 1 marshal, and a room full of witnesses. This was it, the moment everything would break. The saloon was a heartbeat away from hell. Marshal Elias Vaughn's gun was trained on my chest, his eyes wild with desperation. I stood my ground, the letter from Agent Carter clutched in my hand, its words heavy as lead. Gideon Caldwell stood between us, his own revolver drawn, his 40 men ready to turn the Last Chance Saloon into a slaughterhouse. The air was thick with dust and fear. The crowd pressed against the walls, silent, waiting for blood. "Back off, Caldwell," Vaughn snarled, his voice cracking. "This is federal business." Gideon didn't flinch. "You're outnumbered 40-1, Marshal," he said, his voice cold as steel. "Lower your gun, now!" Vaughn's eyes darted to the rifles surrounding him, then back to me. I could see the panic in his face, the cracks in his facade. He knew what that letter meant. It wasn't just paper. It was his death sentence, written in Carter's own hand. I held it up, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline burning through me. "This letter," I said, loud enough for the room to hear, "tells the truth about Ironwood Pass. Vaughn set up the ambush, betrayed his own men, took a cut of the gold. I didn't kill those agents. The Blackthorn gang did, on his orders." The crowd gasped, whispers rippling through the saloon. Amos Caldwell, still leaning on the bar, his nose crusted with blood, looked confused, his eyes darting between me and his son. Gideon's gaze stayed on me, sharp, unreadable. "Hand it over," he said, his voice calm but commanding. Vaughn lunged, his gun flashing. "Nobody reads that!" he shouted, and the saloon erupted. Gunfire cracked, deafening, the air thick with smoke. I dove behind a table, my Colt .45 clearing leather in one fluid motion. Vaughn's shot went wide, splintering the bar. Gideon's men fired, their rifles roaring, and Vaughn hit the floor, his gun clattering away, blood pooling beneath him. It was over in 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I stood, my gun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Vaughn was dead, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The saloon was silent, save for the soft groans of the wounded marshal and the creak of the floor under my boots. Gideon lowered his gun, his eyes on the letter still in my hand. "Give it to me," he said, his voice steady, but there was something new in it. Respect, maybe. I handed it over, my heart still pounding, my fingers trembling from the fight. He unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning Carter's tight scrawl. The room watched, breathless, as he read. Amos shuffled forward, his voice weak. "Son, what's it say?" Gideon didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the letter, his face darkening with every line. "It's all here," he said finally, his voice low. "Ironwood Pass, the ambush, Vaughn's deal with the Blackthorn gang. Brennan's telling the truth." The crowd murmured, shock rippling through them. Amos's face paled, his hands shaking. That can't be right," he stammered. "He's a liar, a thief." Gideon turned to his father, his eyes hard. "You're the one who lied, Pa. You took his money, tore up his receipt, called him out in front of everyone." He held up the receipt I'd given him earlier, now pieced together on the bar. "This is your signature, the bank's stamp. He paid you." Amos's mouth opened, closed, like a fish gasping for air. I forgot," he mumbled, his voice small, broken. "The doc said my memory's been off since the fall. I didn't mean—" Gideon's jaw tightened, but his voice softened. "You made a mistake, Pa. A big one." I stood there, my gun holstered now, my chest tight. The truth was out, but it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Amos had started this mess, but he wasn't a villain. Just an old man, his mind slipping, his pride too big for his own good. I looked at him, saw the frailty in his eyes, the weight of his years. He wasn't the king of this territory anymore. Just a man who'd lost his way. Gideon turned to me, his eyes steady. "You paid your debt. My pa wronged you. But you still laid hands on a Caldwell. That don't sit right." I nodded, knowing where this was going. Blood demanded blood in these parts, truth or no truth. "So what now?" I asked, my voice low, ready for whatever came next. Gideon studied me, his face unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he said, "You ride out of here, tonight, and you don't come back to Caldwell land." Amos sputtered, his face red. "What? After what he did? He humiliated us." Gideon ignored him, his eyes still on me. "You defended yourself. You told the truth. That's enough for me." I felt a weight lift, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Through the window, another dust cloud was rising, smaller but faster, coming from the east. One of Gideon's men called out, "Sheriff Daniels! And he's got a federal marshal with him." My heart sank. Another marshal, another warrant. The past wasn't done with me yet. I gripped the letter tighter, knowing it was my only hope. Gideon noticed, his eyes narrowing. You got more enemies, Brennan? I nodded, grim. More than I'd like. The doors swung open, and Sheriff Daniels stepped in, his face pale, his hands shaking. Behind him was a new marshal, his badge gleaming, his eyes cold as ice. "Colt Brennan," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the law. "You're under arrest for the Ironwood Pass killings." I raised my hands, slow, the letter still in my grip. "I didn't kill those agents," I said, "and I've got proof." The marshal's eyes flicked to the letter, then back to me. "Let's see it then." Gideon stepped forward, holding up the letter. "This clears him," he said, "and it buries Vaughn. Read it." The marshal took the letter, his eyes scanning the pages. The saloon held its breath, waiting for the truth to win, or for more blood to spill. The Last Chance saloon was quiet now, the gunfire's echo fading into memory. The air still smelled of smoke and blood, but the storm had passed. Marshal Vaughn lay dead on the floor, his secrets spilled in the letter I'd carried for 3 years. Gideon Caldwell stood by the bar, Agent Carter's letter in his hand, his eyes heavy with the truth. I sat on a stool, nursing a whiskey Gideon had poured, my hands still trembling from the fight. The crowd was gone, scattered back to their lives, leaving just me, Gideon, Amos, and Sheriff Daniels in the dim lantern light. Gideon slid the letter across the bar, his voice low. "Carter was a good man," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "He trusted you to finish what he started." I nodded, my throat tight. "He did. Took me 3 years, but I kept my promise." I ran my finger along the edge of the letter, its pages worn from years in my saddlebag. Carter's words were a weight I'd carried since Ironwood Pass, a reminder of the man I'd been and the man I wanted to be. He'd been my friend, back in the war, back when we were young and thought justice was simple. He'd figured out Vaughn's betrayal, written it all down, and died for it. I'd killed the Blackthorn gang to stop them, but I'd been running ever since, a wanted man with a name I couldn't escape, until now. Gideon poured another shot, his eyes on his father. Amos sat in the corner, his face pale, his hands shaking. He looked every one of his 60 years, the weight of his mistake crushing him. "Pa," Gideon said, his voice soft but firm, "you owe Brennan an apology, in front of everyone." Amos's eyes widened, his mouth opening to protest, but Gideon's stare silenced him. The old man stood, slow, his shoulders slumped. He faced the few remaining patrons, his voice trembling. I was wrong," he said, his words barely audible. "I forgot about the payment, called Brennan a liar. I'm sorry, for all of it." I looked at him, seeing not the king of the territory, but a broken old man, his mind slipping from a fall he'd never recovered from. "We're square, Amos," I said, my voice steady. "No hard feelings." Gideon nodded, satisfied, and turned to Sheriff Daniels. "Send a telegram to the federal marshal's office," he said. "Tell him Vaughn's dead. Tell him why. This letter clears Brennan's name." Daniels nodded, eager to please, and scurried out to send the message. I took a sip of whiskey, the burn grounding me. The truth was out, but I wasn't free yet. Not really. I'd put hands on a Caldwell, and in this territory, that meant something. Even with the truth on my side, I was still a marked man. Gideon seemed to read my thoughts. "You're leaving tonight," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Don't come back to Caldwell land. But you're a free man now. No more running." I met his eyes, seeing something I hadn't expected. Respect. "Thanks," I said, my voice rough. "For listening." He nodded, pouring another shot. "To Carter," he said, raising his glass. "And to second chances." I raised mine, the whiskey glinting in the lantern light. "To Carter," I echoed. We drank in silence, honoring the dead, celebrating the living. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was the kind of sunset that made a man believe in new beginnings. As the last light faded, I made my decision. "I'm heading north," I said, setting my glass down. "Montana, heard they're hiring lawmen up there. Men who know how to track real criminals." Gideon smiled, a rare thing. From outlaw to lawman, Carter would have liked that. "Maybe," I said, standing, my boots heavy on the floor. "But I think he'd understand. Sometimes a man's got to become what the world needs him to be." I left a coin on the bar, the clink loud in the quiet saloon. Amos called out as I reached the door, his voice frail. "Brennan, thank you, for not killing my boy when you could have, for showing him mercy stronger than pride." I nodded. tipping my hat to him, then to Gideon. "Take care of your paw," I said. "And remember, the truth always finds its way home." I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a baptism. Shadow waited at the hitching post, his black coat gleaming under the stars. I swung into the saddle, the letter tucked safely in my bag, a reminder of what I'd fought for. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't running. I was riding towards something new. As I spurred Shadow north, the town fading behind me, I felt it, a weight lifting, a chain breaking. Cole Hartwell was gone, buried in the dust of Ironwood Pass. Colt Brennan was a free man, carrying Carter's truth, ready to face whatever destiny waited in Montana. The stars burned bright above, guiding my way, and I knew, deep down, some things were worth fighting for, no matter how long it took.